So good morning. I'm Senator Holly Mitchell, and I'd like to welcome you to our first community town hall, community cabinet meeting since we've made our transition to the Senate. So we thank you for coming out on a Saturday morning to really engage in what I believe is really critical conversation about our state and our community. We've held community town hall meetings every year since we went to Sacramento, first in the Assembly and now in the Senate, around this time of year, primarily to talk about the state of the state and the state budget. You know, I've served in the Budget Committee in both the Assembly and now the Senate, and we've had some really tough budget years. And so when we came together this time of year, many of you who participated in the past, you'll recall we would have next 10, I always say next 10 here, and we would do the clickers to try to figure out how to balance the budget. We're not doing that this year. Budget's in much healthier shape than it has been historically. We'll get into that in a little bit. But we wanted to come together, as we always have, in a different part of the district. Every year we gather in a different section of the district to bring a different group of neighbors and constituents together to talk about not only the budget and our legislative priorities for the year, but a critical issue facing a number of communities in the 26th senatorial district, and that's oil drilling and the practice of fracking and acidization. So we've got a panel of experts who are not only here to talk to you about their perspective of what's going on in our community, but also for you to know who to call and the resources that are available to you when you have questions and concerns, people you can reach out to get fact-based information. So again, thank you so much for coming. And we'll go ahead and get started. First of all, I hope you saw when you came into the gallery out there some beautiful artwork. Today is March 1st, and it's the first day of Women's History Month. And we wanted to, yes. And throughout the month, there'll be a number of community celebrations and ways in which we acknowledge the role women play historically and today. But we wanted to also acknowledge Women's Military History Week, which begins on March 16th. And to honor the contributions of courageous women who've served in the military, we're hosting an art exhibit, not only here today, but in my office throughout the month of May, of artwork by women veterans to highlight many of their talents. So today in the foyer, we have pieces by Bonnie Warrington, who served in the Air Force, and Deborah Lambert, who served in the Navy for over a decade. So I hope you've had a chance to connect with these women, and we want to thank Mr. E.J. Steele for helping us curate the exhibit. Again, the pieces that are here today, and we hope that you'll stop by the district office, which is right across the way, and see some of the additional artwork that'll be on display throughout this month and through May. A couple of housekeeping matters. First of all, not only is this our first town hall as a member of the state Senate, but we're also live streaming today. And so there will be Californians who will tune into my state Senate website and will be able to witness today's town hall. Technology is not such that they can participate quite yet, but hopefully we'll get there soon. But I'm very proud that today's town hall will be live streamed on my website. Second of all, when you checked in, my staff and volunteers provided question and comment cards. Sonia, if anybody has an example of a card, if you could hold it up. Okay, thank you, in the front row. The blue card's perfect. So we want to make sure that if you have questions throughout the course of the presentation, that you make your notation. Staff will be around to pick them up. If your question doesn't get answered today because of time, which we shouldn't have too much of a problem with, I don't think, we'll make sure to post the answer to your question on our website. See, that's our slick way of making sure that you go to the website regularly. If you want the answer to your question, you got to go to the website. Also on the card is a way for you to sign up to make sure that you are on the website. You know, we don't do newsletters anymore. Back in the day, you'd get a newsletter every so often from your elected official. That costs too much money. And so to stay connected and know what we're doing on your behalf in Sacramento, we ask that you give us your email address, and so you will get periodic newsletters letting you know what's going on in Sacramento on your behalf. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with our legislative priorities for the year. You know, I got elected in a special election in September. This is the second, thank you. This is the second calendar year of the legislative session. Each session has 2 calendar years. And so we'll end session in the fall. And so I'm kind of coming in midstream. It's like, you know, your family moves in the middle of 7th grade. So I've come into the Senate kind of mid-year and really beginning to understand the culture of the Senate. It's a very different house, kind of getting my footing. I've got new committee assignments. And so we wanted to share with you some of our priority bills going into this next year. Some are issues that I've championed since I was elected to the Assembly in 2010, and some issues are new. First of all, if you've come to any of our meetings, you've engaged me, you know that one of my drivers, what took me to Sacramento, what agitated me enough to decide to run for public office, was my concern about the needs of working families and children really not being met, particularly during California's 10-year tough deficit, 10-year tough budget cycle. And so poverty alleviation, making sure children have the resources they need to be successful, is the area I've worked on my entire professional career, and is the lens that I really bring to Sacramento. So a number of the bills you'll see on the board really focus on our concern around the fact that California has the highest child poverty rate in the country. We beat out places like Alabama and Mississippi. We have the highest child poverty rate in the nation. 1 in 4 California's children lives in poverty. 1 in 3, some studies suggest, in LA County live in poverty, and some of those children live in what we call deep poverty. And so our first bill you see there, SB 899, is our legislative priority this year because we convened a CalWORKS retreat 2 years ago where we brought thought leaders, CalWORKS recipients, child health and development experts from around the state together to really talk about what's been the public policy driver that led us to this place of being last on the list in terms of child poverty. And there were a couple of critical policy issues that came to the top, and this is one of them. Under the Wilson administration, a policy was developed called the Maximum Family Grant that said that if you were a family on CalWORKS and you had an additional child while you were on CalWORKS, your grant would not be increased. And so it's created this artificial ceiling for low-income working families. The average CalWORKS grant is about $470 per month. And all of us are LA County residents. I can't fathom how a family of 3 survives on $470 per month. And so looking at the maximum family grant, we really hope to adjust it. 15 states have reversed this policy. The original thought behind the Republican administration's push for this policy was that it would reduce out-of-wedlock births. Across the nation, it's had 0 impact on the number of births from families, low-income working families. It's clearly just a very oppressive policy whose time has come, in my opinion, to be reversed, like the 15 primarily red states that have already done so. So hopefully we'll be able to repeal the maximum family grant and give working families the extra resources they need to help their children thrive and be successful. Another critical issue impacting our district is human trafficking. There's been a lot of media attention. I served in the Commission on the Status of Women about 10 years ago. It was an issue the Commission really tried to champion. But sometimes public policy issues take a while to get, enough steam and enough critical mass to really make a difference. The LA County Board of Supervisors, Supervisor Mark Ridley-Thomas, Supervisor Kanabe, have passed a resolution at the county level. And we're participating with a number of my colleagues in the legislature to really begin to look at what role the state can play in protecting children. And so we've got kind of a 3-prong approach. I'm carrying a package that helps support law enforcement in identifying and punishing predators who take advantage of children, because that's what they are. We've got another piece of legislation that will help support children and educate them about this new phenomenon. They are targeting young girls and boys at the middle school age. And so just like we've had the campaigns Say No to Drugs, or we've had the campaigns to Stranger Danger. I remember that when my son was in kindergarten. We have to arm and equip children with the tools they need to protect themselves. So that's SB 1165, the school curriculum, SB 1388, increasing penalties for the traffickers, and SB 955. Law enforcement came to us and said, we need additional tools to make sure that we've got the resources to identify traffickers and bring them to justice. And so we're going to add human trafficking to the list of crimes that allows law enforcement to use a wiretap in their investigation process. Moving on to foster care. Again, as LA County residents, we've had lots of news reports about Department of DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, the number of children in foster care who have fallen victim again while in foster care to abuse and harm and some deaths. And I've talked to the director here, read the LA Times reports, and really tried to find again what role the state needs to play to make sure that we are protecting the children we are responsible for. And one critical issue that came up was the issue of private foster family agencies and how the State Department of Social Services didn't have all the resources they needed to really provide oversight and regulate those agencies. And so we've introduced a bill that creates tighter regulation and provides closer scrutiny to the privately held foster family agencies. And again, this is our effort to make sure that children who are in our care, who are our charges, are indeed protected and safe from harm. And I think the last bill of critical importance to many folks here is our SB 1132, our moratorium on fracking. I've joked with folks, now I wish the anti-poverty and the human trafficking and the foster care bills could have got that same kind of love. We've got to talk about all of these issues, how they impact our communities. I have joked with colleagues and talked about losing my 2 front teeth when I introduced the moratorium bill. So good thing for dental insurance, I got 2 new front teeth, and here I go back again, trying to lose them again. So SB 1132, the moratorium on fracking and other well stimulation methods. We're going to have a full conversation about that. But the lens I bring to this issue is one from an environmental justice perspective. When I presented the bills in committees last year, we showed overhead, visual displays of the communities that surround the Inglewood oil fields. The communities that I have lived in and grew up in, and many of you are residents of. And really, my goal was to make that correlation so people understood that this wasn't something we were talking about in abstract, that Inglewood has a unique distinction in the country as the largest urban oil field with residents who live, 1 million people within a 5 to 10 mile radius. And that was the context in which we talked about it, and the context in which I will again introduce the bill and continue to have the conversation. And again, we'll get much further into that throughout the course of today's town hall. So lastly, I want to talk about the budget. I have always said since joining the legislature that the state budget really is a value statement, much like your household budget. You can take a look at your own check registry and determine what's important to you. Housing is important to you. Those of you who have kids in school, education is important to you. Well, the state's budget is also a value statement, and what we choose to fund, what we choose to cut is a reflection on what we prioritize. Me as a legislator, you as residents of the state. And so I've worked really hard the last several years, particularly in the Health and Human Services Subcommittee, to make sure that the critical services that so many California residents require on life and death kind of services are protected. And times when I frankly couldn't protect them, that at least we talk about it, acknowledge it, in hopes of a year like this and a budget like this, where in January when the governor released his budget, we had $6 billion. Current estimates from the Legislative Analyst's Office and Department of Finance suggest that we're up to $11 billion. So, the governor's vision is pay down debt, save for a rainy day. As I have told the governor since I got to Sacramento, it's already raining in my community, literally and figuratively. And so it's my opinion, and many of the opinion of my Democratic colleagues in the Senate, that we have enough money to do both. Pay down critical debt, save for a rainy day, and again begin to invest in critical services that California residents need. Thanks to you and your support of Prop 30, K through 12 has been made whole again. We've been able to fund public schools back to the 2008 levels when they took the deep, deep cut. That's the good news. The not so good news are the other programs that took horrible cuts that this governor's budget doesn't fund. So that's where our collective work comes in. So the cuts to child care, we eliminated about 150,000 child care slots just since 2008. And so as I tell the governor all the time, unfortunately, children aren't born school age. While we focus a lot of our attention on K through 12, a lot happens 0 to 5. And the elimination of those child care slots really has created a dire situation, I think, in the state of California for working mothers like myself. And so I'll be working very closely with my colleagues to make sure that we are smart and strategic and thoughtful in the areas in which we talk about reinvestment. He likes to say spending, I like to say investment, because our kids are our primary commodity. And making sure that they are equipped and supported is, I think, my primary role as a legislator. So at this point, do we have any others? Is that the last slide on the legislation? Again, we've got a package of about 16 bills. We didn't want to have you all nodding out here and go through all of them. If you go to my Senate website, which will be on the screen at the end of the slides, you'll be able to track all of the bills. But I wanted to give you a general sense of the priorities that we have taken from all of you at the community cabinet meetings we've had over the course of the last 3 years. Priorities in environment, education, health, public safety. And these are the issues that we're going to continue to carry into the Senate. If there are any questions on the bills, on the budget, before we move forward, I'd be happy to entertain them now. If you don't have a card, why don't you just, I see some folks with cards, why don't staff grab the cards? If you don't have the card, why don't you just stand up and ask your question? Yes. Yes. Right. Right. Yes, thank you very much for raising that. Unfortunately, the state in the last couple of years, again, have done harm to just the kind of programs you're talking about. The primary funding source, particularly for the center you referenced, is the county level. Many of them are county funded. The state had a huge role to play in something called adult day health centers, which were a critical component in our community for a variety of reasons, for working families. I'm a classic example. My mother's watching live stream, so maybe I can get away with saying that she's not right here. But I'm classic sandwich generation. My mother's 77, having health challenges. I'm an only child, and I have a middle schooler myself. So like many of my constituents, every day I am juggling and managing, making sure that she has the appropriate support and care she needs, as well as the middle schooler. And programs like the one you referenced and adult day health centers were critical tools in our ability to make sure that seniors are safe and seniors have places to go. Seniors have places to go for meal service. My staff volunteered at the Culver City Senior Center and has served meals a couple times, and I've done the same thing at the one in the Ladera Senior Center. Unfortunately, when I talked about the critical cuts to major services, the state's role in those programs have really peeled back in recent years. And so from my standpoint on the budget committee, that's where I think I play the strongest in terms of making sure that both ends of the spectrum, from children and child care to senior services, like you said, those who are continuing to live independently have the resources they need. From my perspective, it's about the money and making sure that the state continues to put resources into those programs when appropriate, because like I said, the center you're talking about is primarily county funded, but the state did harm when we eliminated adult day health. And I fought that long and hard, and we're continuing to track that to make sure that the seniors who were receiving care there continue to receive appropriate services where and when appropriate. You have a follow-up question? No, I know. Yes, and those are the centers that primarily receive support at the local levels. Very little state money went to those kind of centers. The adult day health centers were solely state funded, and we eliminated those. I understood your point. Let me just take a quick look at these. Okay, these are all fracking questions, so we'll hold those. Yes. Good morning.
And have had health care challenges. There is a new issue that is coming up. I want to bring it to your attention. She is independent. However, there have been members of my family who have used my mother's credit and have really, really messed it up over the years. Now my mother finds herself not being able, and she is a retired LAUSD teacher with a master's degree and a decent pension. And she's being turned down for housing in a public independent living because of bad credit. And I find myself having a very hard time trying to find this wonderful woman a place to live other than an assisted living, which is over $2,000 a month. I think this needs to be addressed. If it is a senior who has money and income, they should be assisted into being able to move into an independent without all that credit checking and all that things that goes on. So a lot of things are not their fault.
So we had a town hall meeting last year, and we're going to continue it every year, where we worked with a group, and it was called Senior Scams. We had resources, folks come like we've come today, and your story is amplified tenfold. Seniors are preyed upon using the telephone, banking scams, all kinds of issues. And we had people from banks. We had a great panel of about 5 folks who gave them actual tools, also gave us resources. And so you need to follow up with my staff on how to report them, those kind of circumstances. And the challenge is when it's family members, it gets a little prickly. We had seniors come to say, I know niece, I know son has done something, but sometimes the seniors are afraid and embarrassed to come forward because in some instances they may have signed trying to help a family member. So it's kind of delicate. We're going to continue to do the senior scam, so stay tuned to our website so you'll know when it was scheduled. It was an amazing resource. We had a room, the Tom Bradley Community Center on Pico, filled with seniors who walked away with resources, and they also made a pledge to go back to all of their own organizations, their churches, their sororities, their organizations, to share the information they got. It's clearly a chronic issue that can be delicate when family members are involved, but there are avenues and places to go for help, so follow up with staff. We're going to take a couple more questions and we'll move on to the next. I see you, sir, but I'm going to go to this lady first. Yes.
Wilshire District, the Mid-Wilshire District, I almost fell over a man right out of the 99-cent store, flat out. I have seen more and more homeless people and people standing You know, there used to be, they had their corner with signs, I'm hungry, and you can't, you know, I don't have that many dollar bills with me, and it breaks my heart. And I also notice, and I know it's somewhat local, that the rents in my neighborhood are going to be like New York. I mean, you're not going to be able to live in the Mid-Wilshire district anymore if you're a middle-class person. And I'm very fortunate. I bought my condo 22 years ago, but I can't move. And if I can't walk up the stairs in my unit, I'm going to be in trouble. But aside from that, it occurs to me also that general funding is at a 1940s or 50s level. If you're in poverty, that level of money that you get, if you're on welfare or whatever we want to call it, is ridiculous. You can't, I mean, the food prices are rising daily. How are people who are middle class, who can't afford to live, going to live in a city that is becoming unaffordable? And I think it's going to be the whole state. Each good community is going to have that, to protect itself, is going to do that. And California is going to go down.
So I'm going to invite you to fly back to Sacramento with me on Monday morning, because I couldn't agree with you more. You know, income inequality is the conversation that we're having more and more. The president acknowledged it. We've got a number of select committees. I've got a select committee on income inequality and the gender lens, how women are disproportionately still earning less per dollar than men for the same job, and how that impacts you across your life cycle. If you've earned less throughout your professional career, when it comes time to retirement, more senior women live in poverty than men. It's an issue, and you know, this is the 50th anniversary of the war on poverty. 50 years ago, LBJ declared the war, and so lots of NPR stories about have any of the poverty alleviation programs actually worked. Lots of debate. Right. Lots of debate on Head Start. Lots of debate on what is now CalWorks. And I think the debate has to continue. We are in a unique place in the state of California. The reason our child poverty rate is the highest it is in the nation is the new poverty measure, which has been updated compared to the federal poverty level, which takes into account housing costs. That's why we now have the highest poverty rate, because we're all factoring in the cost of living in the state of California, cost of transportation, food cost, cost of housing. And so I don't have the answer, but know that I'm continuing to raise the red flag and continuing to engage community residents, the legislators, and the governor in this election year, in this very real conversation about the new face of poverty. You talk about the kind of historical or traditional homeless population. Well, it's changing. If you drive or take a walk down Skid Row, like I did about 6 months ago with the Select Committee on Homelessness, I saw more women and children on the streets in Skid Row than I ever have. It's the new face of poverty. When you go to food banks, people who are there now receiving support for food banks for folks who used to volunteer or work for corporations that contributed to the food bank. So the last 10 years plus have been really hard on Californians, and it's the new face of poverty, and so we have to be clear about that and develop policies that address the needs of Californians today. Working families and children, I think, across the board have taken a disproportionate hit when we look at the cuts across the board. And again, I think we have an obligation to make sure that when good times have returned, when we have money in the bank, when we're back in the black, that we've got to begin to invest again in those critical programs that are life-sustaining. Through the elimination of redevelopment dollars. Redevelopment is what funded low-income housing construction. We've lost that. The governor eliminated that 2 years ago. Enterprise zones may be next. And so we've lost our core funding stream for low-income housing development. So we're trying to work with local communities to figure out how we create housing stock for people who need it. These are all really tough policy issues that I don't have a short answer for, but know that I'm glad that you're paying attention, and we've got to continue to have the conversation, and we have to hold our elected leaders accountable. This is an election year coming up. We've got to ask the governor the tough questions. With redevelopment dollars gone, how do we fund low-income housing? Where do families go? It's tough, tough issues. We're continuing to talk about it and try to come up with solutions. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, sir. I did promise you. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Madam Mitchell, I guess you might know me. My name is Emmett Simmons. I'd like to piggyback on my associate, what she said, from a humanitarian instinct. What really hurts my heart when I think I was landed at Normandy June the 5th, 1944, when I see the senior citizens 200 feet away, when they have to come and stand and wait for MTA buses with no seat, with nowhere to sit down other than the curb. Now, if we are that poor, and we don't have some money, if MTA don't have a humanitarian instinct is to watch and see, I have my councilman, I've talked to them, I talked to Ridley Thomas about just put some seats there when those senior citizens come with their walkers. They have to stand right there before the bus comes, nowhere to sit down. Now that's ridiculous. Now, it's no need for that sort of thing. When they could put 2, 3 buses of seats there for the senior. Now, I had the same problem at Slauson and Crenshaw, but I got some seats there. So I have daily called Parks' office. I have called Ridley Thomas' office. I know you cannot unilaterally do that yourself, but I think a letter or some kind of conversation, some of those people that we're paying, we taxpayers, and my taxes go up real high, that we want some action.
And you want some seats at the bus stop. So let me tell you what I'm going to do, Mr. Simmons. Let me tell you what I'm going to do. That's an MTA board decision. I don't have a seat on the MTA board. A number of the people you just referenced that you spoke to have more of a role with MTA than I do at the state level. But I'm going to follow up with you. I may have to come pick you up, and how about you and I go to the next MTA board meeting and talk about seating.
Down Crenshaw.
Yes, sir.
I'm on one of the committee members.
Okay. And do you support
They're
that?
inconsistent with the hiring.
Okay.
I asked where was the contractor in Chicago. What's he doing in Chicago?
That's right. We need him in
I
California.
built 15 buildings here in Los Angeles as a contractor, bonded, licensed, and I was living here. And he is a contractor in Chicago. There's nobody from the community on any of the decision making, and I'm an attorney, and I'm threatening to get an injunction to shut it down.
Well, I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of an argument against you, Mr. Simmons. But I think and all the issues you've raised are critical issues that are being discussed in the MTA, and there are any number of advocacy groups that are all involved in that. I get that. The first issue you raised is a very salient issue, I believe, and one that I will do what I can to support you with. I think it's completely appropriate that we need to make sure that we have seating for seniors at the MTA stops. I appreciate you raising that, and I'm going to follow up with you. Thank you. Thank you. We've been joined by Council President Herb Wesson. We're about to move into our fracking conversation, but I'm going to invite you. You want to come and talk about the action the city took now? Tell me what you'd prefer to do. Okay, please join us. sir. Oh, okay. Oh, I appreciate it.
I'll shake hands, but I'm hugging you. In fact, my announcement will be 2-3 minutes. We're here, and I'm representing the city of LA, to show our support for Senator Mitchell and her efforts in Sacramento, all of her efforts, but in particular where it relates to putting some kind of controls of sorts where it relates to fracking. And I just wanted to announce that yesterday in the city council, we took a vote, a unanimous vote, that directed the city attorney's office to draft an ordinance that will put a moratorium on fracking. It is our hope, thank you. It is our hope that any actions that we have taken will be able to help you in what you need to do where it relates to the next level. And I just wanted basically to come by to say you can count on our support. We'll be there for you whenever you need us. I do want to thank Barry and his shop. They worked real closely with my office when we were trying to sort what was going on at our drilling site on Adams. So it's good to see you again. I've known this man for quite a long time, and I'm glad that you would join Miss Mitchell and help her in any way that you can. So know that you have a supporter in me personally, and know that you have a support from the city of Los Angeles. So with that said, I don't want to disturb your program. I just wanted you to know we're here. Oh, it was unanimous, and it took 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Everything's about timing. The timing was right, and we did it. Anyway, thank you all. Thank you, Holly.
I know, it's my rain boots. Just be careful. So maybe I get to keep my front teeth this year with city council behind me. That's excellent news. Let's go ahead and move to the slides very quickly. All of you in the room will recognize these slides, but like I told you, my frame of reference in Sacramento is to make sure that my colleagues understand that for me this is two things. It's a regional issue for the 26th district, and it's an environmental justice issue. And so, as I said earlier, about 1 million Angelenos live within a 5-mile radius of Inglewood. And again, there are a number of drilling operations across the district that are taking place literally in residents' backyards. So here, the first slide is of active and idle wells. In the middle of the 26th district, you see the area around Inglewood, oil fields. Click to the next slide, Ellen. This is the area that Council President Wesson was just referring to, the oil wells in the West Adams community. We've listed to the right-hand side there all of the community resources, from schools, elementary to middle schools, to St. John of God Retirement and Care Center, AIDS Health Foundation Health Care Center, all of the community assets that are in striking distance, for the lack of a better word, of the oil field on Adams. Next slide. This is University Park, again with the number of schools and other community resources, high schools, elementary schools, Esperanza Community Housing, kindergarten and nursery schools in that immediate area. Next slide. And this is the Jefferson Boulevard in the USC area, right around LA Child Guidance Center. Again, just giving us all kind of a frame of reference. And again, when I go to Sacramento and I'm talking to colleagues who don't know our community, to let them understand what it is we're talking about and why we have the concerns that we do. I've penned an op-ed piece that ran in the LA Daily News. There are copies out there and available to you that really, I think, captures what I have heard from residents since going to Sacramento about your life experience and your concerns around living next to active oil wells. You know, I'm meeting with the oil companies. We have ongoing dialogue. They continue to express their view of the fact that fracking has taken place for 60 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We sent them an advance copy of the op-ed. The comment I got back was that, you know, once again, it was filled with exaggerations. I'm clear in a system of representative government that my role is to represent your issues and concerns. So the point of today's meeting is not for us to continue to engage in a conversation that we have up to this point, because we can stack the evidence on both sides. Everybody's got to study to determine whether it's safe or whether it's dangerous. The point of today's meeting is to bring key officials to you to talk to you about who to call if you smell something strange in your neighborhood, to understand who's on first, what's on second. You follow me? Because the vast majority of the calls that we get from constituents are from people who don't know what to do. There are a number of activists who have become professional activists in this area, and their reputations precede them. But the vast majority of the people we hear from are community residents who are afraid and don't know who to call. And so our goal today was to have the conversation, bring people to the community to provide us with information and support and resources on what to do. Fair enough? Ellen, is that our last slide? Excellent. So with that, let's roll directly into our panel presentation. I'm going to give really very short introductions, gentlemen. I'm going to do it all at once and then have you go in the order that you're here on the stage. Is that comfortable for you all? Excellent. I asked him twice the correct pronunciation of his last name, and let's see if I get it right. John Garoche. And he said, I'm going to say it's perfect however you pronounce it. John Garoche, who's the Underground Injection Control Supervisor for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, also known as DOGGR. Mr. Garoche joined DOGGR in May 2011 after being a supervising hazardous substance scientist with the Department of Toxic Substance Control for 6 years. Prior to that, he spent 12 years with the Regional Quality Control Board in LA, and he's a registered professional geologist in California. Next, we have Dr. Barry Wallerstein, Executive Officer of the Air Quality Management District, also known as AQMD. Dr. Wallerstein has over 30 years of experience in urban planning and environmental assessment with an emphasis in air pollution control and public policy development. He has served at SCA QMD in various positions since 1984 and was appointed Executive Officer in August 1997. Samuel Unger, Executive Officer of the Los Angeles Regional Water Board. Mr. Unger serves as Executive Officer for the LA Regional Board. Prior to his appointment, he served as Assistant Executive Officer, overseeing the Groundwater Division, and prior to that, as the Section Chief of the TMDL program. He joined the Regional Board after more than 20 years in private industry as a Program Manager and Project Engineer for Superfund cleanup and industrial wastewater treatment projects. With that, gentlemen, please go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? How about now? Is that better? The division was formed in 1915 and oversees the drilling, completion, operation, maintenance, and abandonment of oil, gas, and geothermal wells in California. The division is a repository for oil, gas, and geothermal well information and publishes production data, technical reports, maps, which are available on our website for review and downloading. The division is organized into 3 geothermal districts and 6 oil and gas districts and employs about 165 people across the state. California is the United States' largest generator of electricity from geothermal energy. In California, there are about 650 high-temperature geothermal production wells and about 280 groundwater injection wells, which are needed to replenish the reservoirs for geothermal production. California produces about 540,000 barrels of oil per day, and there are about 88,000 active oil and gas wells. On our website, you can find all the production information, and as the slide was shown earlier, you can zoom into a field and identify a particular well and look for the oil and gas production associated with that well. You can determine the status, and we're in the process of scanning all of our well files so you can see the specific data for each well if you want to see it. With the passage of Senate Bill 4, the division was required to implement interim well stimulation regulations that became effective January 1st, 2014. The division is also required to develop permanent regulations, and we're in the process now of, we've accepted public comments, we're reviewing the regulations, the draft regulations, and we may go out for a second or third public comment period to accept more comments on the proposed regulations. The new permanent regulations are supposed to be effective January 1st, 2015. In addition, the division is also required to develop an environmental impact report, a statewide environmental impact report, and that is supposed to be finished and published by July 1st, 2015. The division is also developing a web-based posting for public notices about well stimulation activity. So you can go to our website and immediately identify which operators are proposing for well stimulation and then which well. Oh, I'm sorry, that was it. Thank you.
Quick question.
Yes.
One of the questions that's already come forward talks about how can community residents be engaged, and you talked about the regulations. It's likely that DAGR will go out for a second round of input on regulations. I know that there are kind of grass top advocacy organizations, having been one in my past life, who engage in the regulatory process on a regular basis. How can community residents, or is there a place or an opportunity for community residents to be aware of the regulations while they're in draft form and provide input? How do they do that?
On our website, we have all the draft regulations, the status of the draft proposal, the drafting of the regulations is available on our website. And there's also an email address that you can send all of your comments to, and we have phone numbers you can call if you want to voice your opinion. And the draft regulations, we're going to probably have, I said, 2 or 3 more public comment periods for people to come, and they can provide comment cards or provide their comments to us verbally.
And when you say comment cards, those, the meetings or the hearings themselves take place in Sacramento?
All over the state.
Okay. Okay, we're going to hold our questions to the end, please, so fill them out on your note cards, and we'll hold the questions to the end. Okay, next.
Thank you, Senator Mitchell, for the invitation to be here at this town hall meeting. As you heard, I'm Barry Wallerstein, the Executive Officer of the South Coast Air Quality Management District. Our agency is the agency that is responsible for creating plans to achieve clean air in the greater Los Angeles area. As part of our activities, we develop regulations pertaining to industrial and commercial facilities, including oil and gas production facilities. We also do monitoring of the air quality, and we do chemical analysis of the air samples and compare that back to what is considered to be healthful air. Relative to oil and gas production, we have a number of local district regulations for those facilities, and a number of those regulations are directed to ensure that there are not excessive vapors escaping from wells themselves or from the equipment that receives the oil or gas from the wells and does a little bit of processing on site. We also have regulations to prevent air toxic emissions and to mitigate and reduce the amount of air toxic emissions that go into the air. We also are responsible under state law to prevent and address public nuisances. So if you and your homes are experiencing causing you stress or unrest, then that's something else that we work on. We last May adopted a regulation to require the oil field operators to report to us in advance, conduct a well stimulation activity, whether it was hydrofracking, acidizing, gravel packing, or some other activities. We also, as part of that, receive information regarding the drilling rigs that come on site in terms of the types of engines and size, so that we can look at the air pollution that might that activity. We have on our web page, which is aqmd.gov, a section of the web page that lists the reports that we've received in terms of what types of chemicals are being used. It is not a trade secret chemical. We have required them actually to report to us trade secret chemicals that are being used at the sites in terms of the formulations that are used at the sites. And we are analyzing both sets of information, non-trade secret and trade secret chemical reports, to look at the types of chemicals that are being used, whether or not they are of a potentially toxic nature if they come to the surface and are emitted into the air. And then we are also, in combination with that, going out and taking samples at drilling sites so that we can see if we can actually find these chemicals in the air, site or potentially off-site. In addition to that, the operations can use a lot of silica sand, and that can be of concern in terms of silica dust. So we are out at the sites looking to see if there is dust going off-site, use of the silica sand. Our governing board, Dr. Burke, our chairman, has asked us to move forward and tighten our regulations that exist today for these types of operations so that we can further reduce the emissions. And we anticipate bringing new amendments to our rules to the governing board before year's end. And so we're trying to tackle this on many, many fronts. I've personally been to the number of occasions. I've been to the Murphy site on West Adams and toured that facility. I've also been to the Jefferson site and toured that facility. And as one tours those facilities, you can see differences between different operators, but you can also envision things that could be done in the way of better practices at these sites that will be into our upcoming rule amendment. In terms of the senator's question about how can we work together, there's several ways. Number one, we have a 1-800-CUT-SMOG line. So if you're either smelling odors or seeing dust leaving the site or something of an air pollution nature, then we would like you to call that number, follow up and send an inspector out to the site to look at the site. In addition, if we get a large number of calls for a particular site, then actually do is put that site on a watch list, have our field inspectors just randomly drive by the site more often. So it's really helpful for you to contact us in that way. In addition to that, you can go on our website and sign up to receive notice, or you can otherwise contact us and we will give you, for having a public forum like this in the community, discuss our findings and activities related to production facilities, and or you will receive notice when we're having public workshops regarding our upcoming rule amendments. And so from our perspective, it is very, very important that we hear from the community, and the advice and comments that we hear from the community allows us to do scientific work to get at the cause of the impacts in the community so that we can either address it through our own activities or working with jogger or water quality or others. And so I would very much encourage you to be involved because it makes a huge difference. And I guess lastly, I would underscore that when it comes time for us to amend the rule, the testimony from you, the general public, is extremely powerful, and I'm sure the senator would agree. What you relay in terms of the day-to-day experiences you have has a big impact on the final decision. So later this year, when we go to the actual public hearing, I would encourage those of you that are concerned about this issue to try and see if you could take the time to come out to the public hearing, or at least send a letter in comment.
Before we move on to Mr. Unger, and just listening to both of you, I have a concern always, and I know that we in state government really kind of contribute to the same thing. I opened up by saying we don't do newsletters anymore. You have to sign up to get our online newsletter. And what do we do when, particularly for disenfranchised communities who don't have access? You know, government, all the state agencies, all the governmental agencies will go to our website, go to our website, go to our website. And that's not really accessible to everybody. I think about the seniors who've stood up. And I also understand, as a community resident, in listening to just the presentation of the two of you, that it could also be very overwhelming. I live in this community. I'm concerned about my children's health. I come to the town hall. I hear about regulations and forms and amendments to rules. How do we navigate that? And I'm putting myself kind of in the same spot too. How do we expect people to feel empowered to be engaged in the process when we really don't make it that easy?
Well, that's a very good question, and as you know, it's something that we always strive to improve. I have here with me today Derek Alatorre, who's my Deputy Executive Officer for Public Affairs and Legislative Matters, and also the Public Advisor for the agency. And Derek and his staff are available if people call the agency to help walk the caller through our processes and how we can best communicate with them. We do have newsletters. We're also joined by another colleague of mine, LaRonda Bowen, who is the ombudsperson for the California Air Resources Board and works on environmental justice issues, amongst many others. And so we have staff that are specially trained to do that. Senator, I'd like to also note that at our agency, we do a lot of community meetings, very similar to this town hall. In fact, I've done 2 regarding Alanco, where we were right there at the college adjacent to the oil field. And so if you would like us to come to Inglewood, or you would like us to do another town hall meeting more focused on the Murphy Field and West Adams, we would be happy to make ourselves available to do that. And when we do these meetings, we try and bring our executive staff out that can try and explain to everyone exactly what we do in terms of being out in the field, type of samples we can collect, analyze, and then relate that back to concerns that the community is expressing.
I appreciate that, and I hope that you will share numbers, and your staff you've identified will have their card and give their card out. I just, want for us to always be mindful that it's easy to say, well, we've had a convening, and no one showed up. But, I want to and feel that it's my responsibility for us to, take it a little deeper and figure out, as classic kind of community organizers, how we encourage and create the space and opportunity for community residents to be engaged in a meaningful, thoughtful way. And so I'm challenging myself as well and my staff to really figure out what role we can play to make sure that we help connect the dots, and that community residents who are willing to step up certainly know where to and how. Mr. Unger?
Yes, thank you, Senator Mitchell, and thank you on behalf of my board for inviting us to this town hall meeting. Just to try to inform people who we are, what we do. We are the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. I know that's a mouthful. RWQCB is our acronym. And we are a state agency, and we're one of 9 regional board state agencies in California that is essentially responsible for implementing the Clean Water Act and California's Water Act. Our mission is to protect California's water resources for both present and future generations. We're governed by a 7-member board that is all, they're all appointed by the governor, and then they are essentially approved by the Senate Rules Committee. And these individuals serve as volunteers, and their commitment to public service and to community outreach and such is really unparalleled. We have a very proactive board, a very active board that's very interested in this issue of oil production in this region, both in Los Angeles County and Ventura County, whom we also serve. Basically, our role is what we do primarily is we draw rules, we make up various regulations within Los Angeles and Ventura counties to address various pollution problems that is affecting water quality. And as one of our key activities, we regulate various industries, commercial, and some municipal activities too, that can either potentially or actually discharge wastes into the waters of the state. As such, we have regulations. We have a permit on board that basically regulates some aspects of oil production activities, but there's a bit of a hurdle in the sense that many of these activities are essentially exempted from regulation unless they're shown to essentially being discharged wastes, number one, or they have reportable spills. So our board has directed us to essentially be diligent, and we've actually been pleased to report that we've started a pilot program in South Los Angeles to essentially look at all the wells that are producing in this area.
Will that include all the wells that we showed on the screen today?
Well, we already have thank you for the question. We already have Inglewood under permit, if you will, and so we're already regulating Inglewood. What we've decided to do is focus on a very small area in South LA, but there's quite a bit of oil drilling there and oil production in the West Adams area and things like that. So yes, so that part, yes, that part is captured in that. And we're actually region-wide, or at least county-wide, we're working with Dogger, who've essentially given us a list of more than 700 wells that may be producing in Los Angeles County. We're trying to get out to each and every one of them as we complete this pilot project, and we've inspected many of the same wells that Dr. Wallerstein has reported to you in the West Adams, and we have participated also in the Alanco investigation and provided resources to that as well. I talked a bit about the essentially the hurdle, if you will, in terms of finding sites that either have reportable spills or reported spills or off-site discharges, and I really think that the public has a very great role in reporting those to us, and we very much welcome public input. We have monthly meetings of our board. They're held during business hours. Unfortunately, that precludes many people from attending. However, we're open to phone calls, complaints, and things like that. If you see a discharge from a facility, that is, if you see sheeny water with a sheen of it, leaving a facility, we're very interested in knowing that. We will respond to any phone calls that we receive, and we essentially have the same types of activities that Dr. Wallerstein said for air, but for the water side. We have trained inspectors. We know what the best management practices are to keep any waters that are generated and any waste that are generated on site, or when they're shipped off site for disposal, that they are handled in an appropriate manner such that they will not affect the water quality throughout the region. We have laboratory facilities available to us where we can test these things, so we can send inspectors out to take tests of water and take water samples. And I'm happy to note too that our board really is, we're one of the few boards that really has a strong emphasis from our board members on environmental justice and this oil production facilities. And I'm pleased to report that on Monday morning we will have a environmental justice public outreach coordinator in our office. We're, I think, the first of the 9 regional boards that will have that. So we're very pleased that we were able to create that position, fund that position, and we're really looking forward to her participation in all these types of town halls activities, and really to reach out to the community. And certainly we'll be informing her that this pilot project that we're undertaking now is really one of the highest priorities that the board has put upon us, so taking it very seriously. In the meantime, you can certainly call our office. You can call me. In the meantime, my phone, I can give you my phone number now if you'd like. It's,
Please do, and then I
it's,
have an idea on how we're going to gather all the numbers, but please share yours. That'd be helpful.
mine is 213-576-6605. I'm frequently at meetings such as this outside of the office, so my assistant is, her name is Ranji Moffett, and she's at 213-576-6612.
And I repeat the number. I'm sorry.
Oh, for both numbers, or the second number? 213-576-6612. And by Monday morning, I will have a new phone number to announce to you for our environmental justice outreach coordinator.
And so what I'm going to suggest that Ellen and my staff do is we kind of create a call sheet or a contact sheet, and that we collect all the numbers from the 3 of you and the websites that we'll put together, that we'll have listed both on our website, but also a physical call sheet. So anyone who's here who's not online should be able to call our office on Monday and have Ellen get the sheet to you. So you'll have the gentlemen's names, the agencies they're with, all of the websites that they referenced. If you have dates for upcoming meetings, that we can list that, and we'll try to update this, call sheet as often as the information is updated.
And Senator Mitchell, may I add just one other thing
Please.
that I neglected to add, is basically we're very busy with the Department of Oil, Gas, Geothermal Resources in implementing SB4, which is the current regulation for well stimulation treatments such as acidization and fracking. And we are working now, and what SB4 requires us to do essentially is evaluate all potential and proposed fracking and well stimulation activities and determine whether it really needs a groundwater monitoring network, if you will. And so we have started that. We're working with our state board oversight agency, and we're also working directly with Dogger to determine how we're going to do those sorts of evaluations from the permits for well stimulation, and how we translate that into an evaluation as to whether groundwater monitoring is necessary at these particular sites to accompany that those activities. And I will say we don't have funding for that, but we will. Our board has made it a priority that we participate, and we will do so.
Thank you. First series of questions, and I appreciate folks who are giving me questions versus comments. Hint, hint. It deals with water. In the legislature, I'm on the budget committee. We passed emergency, drought measures this week to try to give us all some relief. So first question, Mr. Unger, is for you, and I just gotta. So hydraulic fracturing requires a lot of water. Where will it come from? Another person put it very poignantly. California, including Los Angeles, has a chronic water shortage. Why should I limit my shower while you allow fracking? Where do you get your water?
That's a very good question. We're asked that oftentimes. Essentially what happens, unfortunately, water regulation is somewhat, I don't know, use the word vulcanized, if you will, in our state, whereas there's no, our agency, which is responsible for water quality, we don't really have any jurisdiction over how, we have very little jurisdiction over how water is used. And so if if essentially an entity, a commercial firm, if they obtain water to use for fracking, it's really our responsibility to determine if that fracking will affect other water resources, not really, we don't have jurisdiction over essentially the acquisition and the use of that water for these types of activities.
So in keeping with that, we have more of a comment. The dumping of lead, mercury, and radon into Bayona Creek and 3 million gallons in rainwater runoff, quote unquote, being permitted.
I Well, yes, yes, PX or Freeport McRowan, I think at this point. Yes, they do have a permit from us to discharge stormwater on site, but those requirements are such that the limits of the various chemicals that are allowed to be discharged within that are supportive of water quality. They don't rise to a level that that exceeds a certain limit that is placed in that permit. If it does, if those chemicals essentially do exceed that, they are in violation of their permit, and they essentially are subject to various compliance determinations and enforcement activities, and basically correcting the problem so it doesn't happen in the future. This year, as the senator noted, we're in a drought year. We haven't had much stormwater runoff. From that site. There was runoff yesterday, is my understanding, in the rains, and I understand that samples were collected. We'll have the results of those samples in about 2 weeks, and we will be evaluating whether those samples comply with the conditions in the permit.
And what happens if you find out that they don't? I'm assuming it's AQMD's responsibility to make sure that they are below the acceptable levels. What happens if the results of your testing from yesterday's runoff determines that they're above? What happens?
There's a number of things that can happen. And essentially it starts with the compliance determination, and that's code word for are these chemicals within the range and within the limits of the permit. And if they are not, the board, we have various remedies at our disposal, basically, to essentially either compel action such that changes are made in the operations, such that the stormwater in the future will not exceed these limits. So their BMPs, their best management practices, would be could be changed, and we also have the discretion to issue fines as well.
So it's the same for the air emissions. Normally get a ticket, and then there would be a fine associated with the ticket, and depending upon the severity of the non-compliance, besides them having to come into compliance with the requirement, we might modify their permit to better ensure that they compliance in the future, or in more extreme cases we can go get an order that can cause them to partially shut down their operation, completely shut down their operation, or modify their operation in the interim until they add new equipment and come into compliance.
John, you had some comment. And Gary, if you want some follow-up, you can do it after. I got a table full of questions. We'll keep moving. You had a comment.
In response to the question, where will the water come from for well stimulation? Most of the fluid that is produced is water. The oil is separated from the water, and then the water can be reconditioned and used for well stimulation. It doesn't have to be fresh water.
So it's recycled.
Yes.
Over and over. Another question for you, John. What testing is being done for ground movement in the Inglewood Field area? I have a garden. Is it safe?
The community worked with the County of Los Angeles to come up with the Community Standards District, which requires Freeport-McMoRan to implement a ground movement survey. And that survey is being conducted, and I believe the CSD is up for review right now.
What's CSD?
The Community Standards District. It's an additional set of rules that the community imposed on Freeport-McMoRan for the operation of the field. And there's a set of requirements that if ground movement is greater than a certain amount, that the county is required to review and respond to that information. And if the county has any additional questions about any potential relationship with oil and gas activity, they can send that information to us and ask us to respond.
You mentioned earlier on your presentation community meetings. Are there any more scheduled for the greater Los Angeles area?
Well, for the Inglewood oil field, there is the Community Advisory Panel, which meets, I don't know the exact schedule. Is it every few months? Every third Thursday of the month.
But you mentioned earlier with regard to the regulations and their meetings, are there any more meetings scheduled for the greater LA area around the regulations?
Oh, we're going through, I think we received for the comment period for the proposed regulations, I think we received about 150,000 comments. So we're going through all the comments now. And if there's any significant changes to the proposed regulations, I think there'll be another set of public participation meetings. So to receive more public comments, and I believe, depending on the number they need, they could have several across the state to receive more questions. Excellent suggestion. We'll look into it. There was one at the Culver City, and I was there. And then we recently had one for the draft regulations at Cal State Long Beach. And then at Long Beach Convention Center, there was a public meeting for the draft EIR.
And so I said greater Los Angeles area. It might not be able to come directly to Culver City, but at least it's accessible and people are noticed so they can get there. That would be my desire and expectation. Dr. Wallerstein, my apartment is less than 500 feet away from Murphy Oil, and they have extremely loud generators that keep us up at night. Are they supposed to shut operations down after a certain hour?
That would not typically be a requirement within our permits or regulations. That would be more something that the city could specify, city requirements. And since the city is already going to develop, and in the existing ordinances, city's developing this new ordinance, as Council President Wesson noted, maybe that's somehow, if it hasn't been addressed in the past, part of the overall preparation of the new.
With regard to air quality, people are curious about how the general public can be made aware of pollution levels in the city. Is there like a website that shows pollution tracking where the average bear could take a look at and figure it out?
Yes, that's also on our website, aqmd.gov, and you can get not only the current air quality that we measure in our monitoring stations, but a prediction of quality for the upcoming. Relative, if I could, Senator, relative to this particular issue, we have, as I was mentioning, not only this 1148.2 that we're implementing, but we have a section on the website that is kind of dedicated to some of the activities we're doing around production, where you can see additional information, for example, and the monitoring results we've gotten in our interpretation. So I would.
Thank you.
Yes, I was just saying, if you go on our website, you'll not only be able to see the typical information about the general air quality in the Los Angeles area, but we also have posted information specific to our field activities, including sample measurements at Allen Co., with an interpretation of the data in terms of what we believe the data shows.
Thank you. This might be for you, John. Is there a breaking point for violations where the drilling companies are no longer permitted to do business or continue to drill?
That's a good question. I'm not sure what is meant by a breaking point. We have field inspectors that go out on a 24-hour basis to witness critical operations for the drilling of the wells. If there are,
I guess, give us an example of what an extreme case, what an inspector would have to find for drilling to stop, for you all to then step in and tell the company they can't drill there anymore.
Before a well can be drilled, there's certain well activity that can be conducted before the blowout preventer is placed on top of the well. And if our inspector goes out and observes that the blowout preventer doesn't meet the requirements of the permit or is non-functioning, then they can be told, to stop. The state supervisor can always order the operator to stop if there's an immediate threat to human health or the environment. So the state supervisor does have that authority.
David McNeil, I'm not clear. You may have to help me with this question. Can UIC assist with earthquake risk assessment in the area?
UIC stands for Underground Injection Control.
Thank you.
And we have not seen in the Southern California area any association with underground injection control and any kind of clustering of earthquakes. The United States Geological Survey has a website, and anyone can go on the website and look at earthquake data and look at, they have maps, and you can change the requirements or the input parameters for the mapping to say, I want to see all earthquakes within 30 days, basically no matter what size. And I think you'll see that they do not cluster around the oil fields. They do line up along the faults, and you can choose to display the various faults, and you can zoom in to certain areas right around the fields in Southern California and see if there's any any kind of clusters or where recent earthquakes have been.
You need to get is this a follow-up to this? Okay.
Yeah. Liquefaction is usually a phenomenon for very shallow soils, whether soft or unconsolidated, and groundwater is shallow. And I believe it's the California Geological Survey has liquefaction maps that you can look at from their website and see if you live in an area where there could be liquefaction during an earthquake. I don't think it'll liquefy during an earthquake. You have to look at the depth at which the well stimulation is taking place, and there's usually it's usually thousands of feet down, and there's a tremendous amount of overburden, rock and soil above that if you don't prop the fracture open, the weight of the overburden will close it. And so there's tremendous pressure above thousands of feet of rock and soil that hold that closed. So it's not going to liquefy during an earthquake because of the well stimulation.
Again for you, John, DOCR has very few inspectors in relation to the number of wells that we've heard are active wells here in LA County. Please explain how DOCR is going to verify drilling reporting, which is done by oil companies and reported themselves.
Sure. So the operator will submit to us a notice of intent to drill, abandon, or rework a well, and the permitting engineer will review the program and specify certain requirements in the permit that the operator is to do. And there's a section in there where the permitting engineer calls out specific operations that are to be witnessed by DOCR staff. And the operator will call into the office on a 24-hour basis, and we have field inspectors that go out on a 24-hour basis to witness those key operations to make sure everything's in compliance.
Follow up on the previous question with regard to property damage. When do you expect the results of Inglewood uplift and subsistence to be completed as a result of property damage complaints?
This is, I believe, an ongoing process, and the requirement for notification for property damage is addressed in the Community Standards District requirements. And yes? Yeah, my understanding of the requirements in the Community Standards District is not that there's a specific limit as to the amount of motion that is allowed or not allowed, but it's a reporting requirement that if it's greater than 0.6 inches that the county will review and address, and if they have additional questions, they could ask us for some information or support. And they did send us a letter asking us for additional information. The county asked us for some input. So we're reviewing that, the county's work, and we've had some discussions with Freeport about the type of data we would need to see to, further that evaluation. It's an ongoing process in that the ground movement survey is conducted on an annual basis, and the ground movement survey is adjusted as needed based on community complaints and concerns. So if there's a concern about some property damage, the reporting requirement is to Freeport-McMoran to go out and address that, but you can also work with the county. Yes, go. Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if the division is going to say it's this person's fault or that person's fault. What we're looking at is, trying to see if there's actually a relationship between the injection production activities and fault movement. And we do, we have met with the county and we've received their letter, and we've issued a letter back to Freeport saying we would like some additional data clarifying what kind of injection and production activity is occurring in certain zones. And it's kind of an ongoing process. I mean, there's, in the past, when the field was first discovered, there was only production. Now there's production and injection, which changes over time. So trying to really nail down the details takes a lot of detailed analysis of our records and Freeport's records to try to, work out these issues about, potential ground movement.
So to answer his question, there is no date that you can give him when that will be completed?
Not a specific date, but I think we'll have a letter out probably, it's about 2 or 3 months, because we're going to have another round of discussions with Freeport coming up in the next few weeks about this.
Please describe, let me tell you why we did it this way. I am working very hard to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to get their question asked, those who are more seasoned and engage in this issue on a regular basis, and those who aren't. And so we're going to do the rounds to make sure everyone has a chance. They'll be here afterwards, and if your specific question didn't get answered, you'll have a chance to pose it to them. Have you filled out a card? Okay, go ahead. It's okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm. So how do we prevent that? How do we prevent that? And let me add to that. Not only self-reporting, what do you do in the instance where you validate that they didn't report and someone else had to tell you? What happens then?
Okay, so when someone receives a violation notice, it goes through a review. There are factors specified in state law that are utilized to determine the severity of the violation, and things like intent come in, frequency of violating comes into the formula, and so what happens is the amount of penalty is increased, and that is done until the point where you have deterrence. In addition to that, if I have a facility that continues to non-report, then what we would do is a couple of things. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, then I have my inspectors go by the facility at a greater frequency. And secondly, to the degree that someone was really intentionally doing that, then we can go in and get an abatement order facility.
LAPD was here in the back of the room, and they had a response to the question around the noise. They said LAPD says that above 90 decibels, and I have no idea what 90 decibels sounds like, but above 90 decibels is a nuisance that can be reported to the city's noise abatement team to investigate and issue notices and citations, and that you call LAPD, not 911, but LAPD. Can anybody give me a comparison of what's as loud as 90 decibels? And you called LAPD? Okay. Okay, so apparently calling LAPD works. That's a good thing. Thank you, LAPD. We see you in the back of the room. And we'll add the LAPD noise abatement phone number to our call sheet that we're developing. You were going to say something?
I thank you for the appreciation, but LADWP is not our department. I hate to say so, but
So we'll send the shout out to the appropriate agency that worked it out for you. Excellent. Yes.
Out my cell phone.
Oh, great.
90 decibel train whistle, 500 feet,
Oh, interesting.
or truck traffic.
Boy, you gotta love Siri. Siri has the answer to everything. So did you hear that? Because say it again closer to the mic, please.
90 decibels is like a train whistle at 500 feet or heavy truck traffic.
And so what you're experiencing is the heavy truck traffic, I'm assuming, to some degree. Mr. Unger, please describe the difference in the definition between regulation and oversight between the use of water that goes on routinely in oil production. Jacqueline Hamilton, you might have to clarify your question.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I can say is, in terms of regulation and oversight, is our department regulates the discharge of wastes into waters of the state. So if their water is used in oil and gas production, and any of that water, we know that it's separated from the oil in many of the operations, and then possibly discharged, if it's discharged from the facility such that that can enter into a storm drain, which then leads to the water of the state, such as Bayona Creek, if it discharges directly to somewhere like the Los Angeles River, we have regulatory oversight and responsibility to ensure that those discharges are permitted. If they're not, it's an unpermitted discharge, a discharge without a permit, and there are penalties within the state of California for discharging without permits. We believe that it is closed loop, that generally that water that is associated with well stimulation treatments, which is a greater volume of water, as you say, gets tied into the overall treatment system, if you will, on the site. But you're right, though, something that, as you use greater quantities of water, there may be a point where that system cannot handle it, and essentially that would have to be discharged, meaning sent off-site. If it were discharged, essentially, and it enters the water of the state, it has to be done under a permit. At this point, we have not received any what we call reports of waste discharge, which is essentially a permit application associated with fracking. So the assumption is basically that it all is handled on site with this quasi-closed system that you described. And so we're not seeing that at this point. At some point in the future, if a operator needed to essentially discharge those wastes from the operation, they would need to obtain a permit to do so. Well, basically, our agency actually, the standards that we use are actually for setting limits in permits is actually very low relative to human health toxicity. We're concerned about ecology, and quite frankly, some of the standards to protect ecological resources are more stringent than those to protect drinking water. So essentially what would happen in the report of waste discharge that the companies provide, they provide a list of the chemicals with a test that verified this from an analytical laboratory that could be found in those discharges in the water, and we would set an individual limit for each and every one of those chemicals. And that limit would be to protect the ecological resources of the water body being discharged into.
John, this question is for you, and it deals with the permitting process that you've talked about a couple times today. Is it true that a drilling permit is approved kind of automatically after 10 days if no response has been given by your agency?
The law requires that we respond within 10 days, but doesn't specify exactly what the response has to be. Sometimes the notice of intent that is submitted will be lacking some information. So a simple question is, hey, we need some additional information. We've responded. The permit is not automatically approved. If we fail to respond within 10 days, then it says the permit is automatically approved.
And is that, so that's not an issue of staffing, that's just based on the way the statute is written?
That's correct.
Dr. Wallerstein, AQMD, regulators and penalties. Number one, are companies self-reporting, or are AQMD compliance officers performing audits?
Both.
And are trade secret, well, tell me what you mean by both. Elaborate a little bit.
Okay. So under our 1148.2, they are self-reporting. And as I mentioned, they are also to report when they're going to be conducting these activities. So we are sending our staff out in the field to take air samples and gather other information during the well stimulation activities or the drilling activities that we also compare back to what they are self-reporting. And we're using that to provide information to the public and for our own decision-making. The woman a few minutes ago asked a question about, are there toxic chemicals, and under the non-trade secret as well as trade secret information, we're clearly chemicals that are identified as toxic. The real question is how much of those chemicals are. Second is, do they escape in air or into the water?
Mm-hmm. And you clarified earlier that trade secret chemicals are not being disclosed.
Legally, we're not allowed
That's
to.
why, hence the term trade secret.
Yeah, not allowed to disclose those, but we can consider those reported chemicals when we develop our regulations, number one. Number two, it gives us insight into what type of air samples to take. So, for example, we've been out in the field at a site and we've taken an air sample and it's identified a toxic chemical in the air sample on site. And so now we can go back and look and see if that chemical was used in the fluids.
Is groundwater at the sites monitored similar to landfill?
For oil and production facilities, well, Yes and no. I mean, basically, at the Inglewood oil field, there is groundwater monitoring. We have various networks throughout the site, and some, in greater density, if you will, more closer to the operations, such as the soil biotreatment operations and things like that. In other ways, it's slightly different in the sense that you get into details such as the depth at which the groundwater is taken, what sort of groundwater we're actually looking for, because groundwater occurs in layers beneath the surface, and things like that. So there are differences in the landfill program than in what we would be looking for in terms of types of chemicals, the depth that the groundwater is sampled, and the frequency that it is sampled. I'd have to answer that on a case-by-case basis.
This question, I think, kind of takes us back to kind of the beginning in terms of the concern about the number of wells allowed. And this question specifically with regard to Inglewood, is there a maximum number? Because this resident says it appears to be growing quite a bit, and they're not sure why.
Yeah, I'd like to add that, or point out that the community around Inglewood and Baldwin Hills took an interest in the operations and worked with the county to impose additional requirements on the operations. So the community really is empowered with overseeing the operations of oil and gas drilling and production. And I believe the details are in the report, the Community Standards District, which is available for download. And it puts on additional requirements on the operator that so many wells can be drilled per year, so many rig days, and in certain circumstances, if a well is drilled, the well will have to be abandoned around the perimeter. So the community is really in control of a lot of the operations above and beyond our authorities.
And they can find that, the document on your website?
Not on our website. It's the Community Standards District is part of the County of Los Angeles, and it's on the, I believe it's LA County Planning Commission website.
We'll add that one, Ellen, if you can hear me, to our call sheet so folks can access it. We've got a number of general questions that we'll make sure that we address on our website. One person said that they have a print newspaper. Their biggest demographic is seniors, and they cover the environment, the Morningside Park Chronicle. So we're going to enlist them in our effort to figure out ways that we can communicate more broadly than just expecting people to go to a website. Now that the war on drugs is over, can we begin community building? And I wasn't aware that the war on drugs was over, so I missed that memo. I think we still have an issue, but I think the broader point is that there are a number of corridors across LA County in the 26th district that, as this resident says, look like war zones that are in need of repair, and that our government should provide funds to rebuild infrastructure and create jobs for residents for South Los Angeles. So we'll continue to address those issues. Again, with regard to the MTA, the Crenshaw LAX rail line is being built to run at grade from 48th Street to 60th Street, Park Mesa, right in front of and passing down the middle of Crenshaw in front of their senior center. This is destroying the look of our community and is a danger in terms of safety to our community members, both young and old. Charles Stewart is my field deputy who represents me on transportation issues. There's Charles. We've gone on record. Charles attends MTA meetings, representing me just as a member of the public. Like I said, I don't have a seat on the MTA board, to talk about our concerns about, A, making sure that the rail line construction doesn't overlook our community. That's an issue. But also to make sure that it's built appropriately and safe in our community. So I've gone on record. Charles has presented testimony while I've been in Sacramento to that point. I would like to thank Congresswoman Karen Bass's staff. Councilmember Gil Cedillo had staff here today. I'm going to pat myself on the back because with a room full of engaged residents like you, I think I did my best to manage traffic. I'm going to let all of you have some closing remarks if you'd like to wrap us up for the day. And if you mind giving another 5-10 minutes, if people have more specific additional questions, they can ask you. Mr. Unger, we'll start with you and come this way.
Yes, I think one thing, well, again, thank you very much for this town hall, and not only to you, Senator, but to everyone who's attended. I think one thing that I've heard today is essentially it relates to sort of a resource issue, if you will, that there may be more oil exploration going on than we have capability of essentially keeping track of and things. So I just wanted to encourage everyone to inform us. You know, if you're seeing water quality impacts, if you have concerns about water quality impacts, please give us a call. We will respond as soon as we can to that call, send an inspector out. And, you know, your participation, I mean, state agency, we serve the public. I mean, we are working for you. And I think that's really the attitude of our board and our staff, and we would just like to encourage you to continue to reach out to us when you see problems in this area.
Very similar comments, Senator. Thank you very much for hosting this informative town hall, and especially a big thank you to everyone that is here, taking time out of your Saturday to come and provide input and feedback to us, as we always try and represent you and address the concerns that you have. You have our commitment. You reach out to us. We will do our best to be responsive. And Senator, if the constituents reach out to you and your staff, please let us know, and we will be responsive to the inquiries that come through your office as well.
Thank you very much. I've noticed that at several public meetings that I've been to, a lot of people have expressed concern about their drinking water, and I just wanted to touch on that briefly. Based on my experience when I was working at the Regional Water Board, I actually worked with Sam Munger for a number of years. And the groundwater basins in the Central Basin and the West Basin are, there's a number of agencies that oversee groundwater quality. You have the local water purveyor that produces the water, and they're required to sample their groundwater production wells and provide that data to the Department of Health Services, and they also produce a monthly report card, which either they can mail to you or you can go to their website and download. If there's anything detected in the groundwater, they're required to increase the monitoring and report that to the Department of Health Services. There's also a lot of the groundwater, when it's produced, there are other agencies like the Metropolitan Water District that bring water to Southern California, and the Water Replenishment District of Southern California replenishes the groundwater basins, and they kind of manage the groundwater budget. They have a network of groundwater monitoring wells across the basins, and they have regular engineering reports that they produce, and they're available for download on their website. So they show you where the groundwater monitoring wells are. They're not just single locations. There'll be a location with multiple completions, so they're looking at a real profile across the groundwater, the aquifers in the basin. And then you can, also with the reports, you can download the water quality data associated with those monitoring locations, so you can monitor the water quality and see what's going on in your area.
Excellent. And I think I would just say in closing, clearly based on the kinds of questions that were raised today, there are people in the group who are incredible resources, who are tapped into all of these kind of community engagement monthly meetings and organizations, running organizations yourself, like the Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. I hope that you not only ask the panelists questions, but get to know someone here in the audience that you may not have known. You know, again, our effort is to make sure that everyone, regardless of your understanding of this very complex issue, really understands that there are people you can go to get information, but that you have a role to play too. As we've talked about the regulatory process and engaging and making sure they know what your experience is living in these communities, I'm going to have to ask you to continue to step up. Everyone, not just those who are leading or engaged in organized entities, but community residents, to make sure that you find your way to make your voice be heard. We will continue to partner and try to create opportunities like this, connect you to agencies to make sure you have access and opportunity. Here is my website. I hope that you all take note. Staff will be working over the next several days to get our call sheet kind of organized. If you don't have access to the internet, please call, and we'll try to make sure that we get the call sheet to you in whatever way we need to. Ellen, did I miss anything else? Please, I want to introduce and make sure you know who kind of Team Mitchell is here in the district. I was able to bring my staff from the Assembly over to the Senate, so we've now worked together as a team for 4 years. Sonia Lopez in the back is Office Manager and Scheduler. Ellen Moy, who is one of our new field deputies, not so new anymore, is our lead on environmental issues. Charles Stewart, Field Deputy and Communications Director. I think Joy Masha was out in the lobby, and the volunteers who always are critical in helping us put events like today on. The Senate communications staff who were here and able to allow us to make this live webcast available on the website. And we're glad to be a member of the Expo Park community. You know, our district office is here now. I grew up going to what was then the Museum of Science and Technology, so I'm glad to be a part of this community and able to host our town hall here. So thanks everyone for coming. Meet someone new today before you leave, because they are your neighbors. We all live in the 26th district, and I appreciate you coming out today. Have a great Saturday.